Yeah, today's video is definitely kind of off the rails of what I normally do for a tech video, but it's actually something that I wanted to address so that way you guys know where I stand on certain things. So when it comes to reviewing Apple, it's oftentimes a black and white war. It's either you love Apple and everything they do, or you despise Apple and everything that they do. And as you can see on this channel, as well as all the other content, well, I've tried to stretch out to other fields as well, but it's really hard to make a tech channel without talking about Apple. Obviously on this one, I'm one of the channels that absolutely loves Apple and the things that they've made. As you can see, iMac, AirPods, I'm recording with an iPhone. I bought a $100 mouse, for crying out loud. You can definitely tell that my bias is definitely leaning towards pro Apple. But does this mean because I love Apple and their products, does this mean everything else out there sucks? No, not necessarily. So I'm actually going to give my stance on why I like Apple and bias towards it, as well as my bias against other companies. I want to be transparent about this so that way you guys know where I'm coming from, especially when I gave a couple rant videos or positive reviews of anything that's not Apple. Why don't I actually just clear that up today? Okay, so the first thing I'm going to explain is why am I biased towards Apple? So here's the one thing that my dad likes to tease me about. He thinks I'm biased towards Apple because of the pretty logo here. No, yeah, Apple products do look amazing. That is kind of subjective, but you gotta admit, Apple knows how to design products and make them look sleek. But is that really the reason why I like them? No. Honestly, to me, that is just a perk. The reason why I like Apple is because it does the things that I needed to do with little frustration. It's actually the reason why I left Windows in the first place. It gave me way too much frustration. Apple, on the other hand, has not given me that frustration. The primary reason why I wanted to go to Apple was actually for Mac OS. And considering that Windows 7 is no longer supported and anything newer than that pretty much sucks, yeah, I'm going to stick with Mac OS. So that was the biggest reason why I was pulled towards Apple in the first place. It actually wasn't really the iPhone. I mean, the iPhone is definitely my favorite phone out there, but I guess a lot of that is definitely because I used the Mac. I used to use a Samsung even while I was using Macs, like my MacBook Pro. And actually, no, I got the iMac after I got my iPhone. But I used to use my Samsung with my MacBook Pro. Honestly, I was really struggling to figure out whether I should stick to Samsung in terms of my phone, or if I should just stick with Apple altogether. Well, I guess I definitely made the right choice because the ecosystem, I made a video about this, the Apple ecosystem is amazing. How can you give crap about choosing to be in a walled garden with amazing vegetation? I do admit, yes, I am in it, but I am choosing to be in it because it's benefiting me more than using scattered companies. That is why I am sticking with Apple. It's because they're doing everything I need to much better than anyone else can. But does this mean I'm going to absolutely buy and love everything that Apple does? No, there are a few things that bug me a lot that Apple is doing today that I just do not like. The Apple TV, for example. You're still selling a box? Why? That is so 10 years ago. Why have they not made like an entire TV kind of like they've made an all-in-one desktop here? If they can make an all-in-one desktop, why can't they make, I don't know, an all-in-one TV? Stands should not cost $1,000. I am sorry, that is absolutely ridiculous. And then there's a few other things that I'm also not going to mention because my no politics rule. There are things that I don't like about Apple, but these things aren't affecting my workflow. I just choose not to buy them. So no, Apple is not the perfect Halo company that sometimes I might make it seem to be. But considering that, well, first of all, I've never used a mouse better than this. An all-in-one like this is such a convenient package. They do so many things so well. I definitely do make it seem like a Halo company, like everything's perfect. Though no, they're not perfect, and I will admit that. There are things that they do that I just do not like. So what about the competition then? Because obviously, you know I favor Apple, but what are my thoughts on the competition? Am I so Apple sheep that all other companies are bad? No, there are companies that also do good things that I really like. For example, Samsung makes very good hardware when it comes to smartphones. Now, unfortunately, they have been ditching some of those things that I like, which I am not exactly impressed with. In general, Samsung knows how to make great hardware for their smartphones. Now, the software, on the other hand, is something that they definitely need to work on because it is, with all these apps fighting over each other. I was able to get over that because I used to actually have to manage 2 different email accounts. Using the Google apps and the Samsung apps between those 2 accounts, having double apps for everything helped me manage those accounts very well. But here's the thing, I'm only using 1 email now. So now having double the apps for everything is really repetitive. It really became an instant mess. OnePlus has also made great things. So, okay, am I just being biased towards these? If I had to disregard Apple, am I being biased towards these companies? Here's how I actually like to think of it. I will give credit to companies. I will like them if they actually make decent stuff. Samsung, I like Samsung because they actually make decent stuff. There are some bad things that they make, but generally they make decent stuff. So despite that, I might put some hate on Samsung. I also still like them because they don't always make bad stuff. I mean, they've had their battery scandals, their foldables are still pointless. They still know how to make good hardware. I'm not disregarding that. The reason why I like OnePlus is because they always nail it with their phones out of the park. They do such a great job, and at generally more affordable prices. OnePlus, it's really hard for me to dislike them because I've actually haven't found a single phone that they've made that is downright awful. Yeah, when I like OnePlus phones, it's really because I'm struggling to find some faults with their hardware. The main issue I have is just software, but that's not really in their control. It's really more of Google's control that I don't like it and why I stick to iOS. So those are the companies that I like. I don't exactly love them, but I don't hate them either. But the reason why I am generally saying they're good companies is because they make good stuff. It's the same reason why I like Apple so much. They make good stuff. Well, mostly good stuff. There are some bad stuff that they make. Then again, most companies all have their bad product every now and then. It's the same reason why I stick to Apple. They make good stuff, but the reason why I mostly stick with them is because they do the best job at making the stuff that I need. So what about the companies that I despise or act like I despise? Like, for example, Google. I have made fun of the Pixel and I have hated the Pixel so much. It was actually my latest video that I have finally changed my mind on the Pixel, and that's because for once Google actually put an effort into it. They actually made a decent phone this time, so I gave Google credit where it was due. That was the first time I actually think one of their phones deserved a flagship price. But why do I still not exactly favor Google so much? Well, the main reason is because they've made 1 generation of phones so far that actually aren't garbage. Meanwhile, they have about 5 other generations of phones that really are garbage. So the way I am basing my bias off of that, okay, they made a great product, but then again, 1 out of so many others, it could be a fluke. I'm still skeptical because they have not done a good job making phones for a long time. I'm really hoping it's not a fluke because I really don't want companies to die or anything like that. I just want them to make good stuff. And if they don't make good stuff, then I'm going to call them out for it. And that's why I keep calling out Google. They have had a bad history of making good stuff. So far, we're on the fluke step. Next, we got to get to coincidence, which is a 2nd generation of good hardware. After coincidence is, okay, we have to reevaluate something there. As soon as we get to generation 3 in a row of good hardware, I will then reevaluate my skepticism on Google. But this is the main reason why I am not exactly a fan of them. First of all, their software does things that I really don't like. Notification management, I know you guys really like to reap on iOS's notification management, but if I'm being honest, Android is much worse. That clear all button really is useful because there's so many freaking notifications. Now let's move on to the other 2 companies that I definitely act like I despise, and Microsoft. Am I biased against Microsoft? Yes, in fact I am very heavily biased against Microsoft because well, they're basically doing everything to lose my praise for. They don't make good stuff anymore. First of all, we got Windows. Windows 7 was awesome, and I love Microsoft. I'm giving Microsoft credit when they actually fixed Vista, replaced it with Windows 7. That was a good move, and I really appreciated Microsoft for doing that. After 7, they've been on such a big downhill. Windows has become, in my experience, it's practically become Windows Vista again. I have had so many people tell me that Windows 10 has been fine. My experience, I mean, if you hadn't watched my Windows 10 rant, my experience, to sum it up, has essentially been like using a Microsoft Surface Duo. I have not found a single person who says the Microsoft Surface Duo is amazing to use. Everyone says it's horrible to use. But speaking of Microsoft's hardware division, well, honestly, it's pretty bad. I always cringe whenever they bring up connectivity on any of their product marketing advertisements. They like to market their connectivity, but it's really horrible. The connectivity on, I'm not going to exactly dive that deep into it, but yeah, the connectivity on Microsoft Surface products is really bad. But then they also just spread out into very niche categories. I mean, at least their laptops have decent performance and they're okay. The biggest complaint I have with them is you can barely connect anything to them. Other than their Surface laptops, first of all, their regular Surface tablets, I don't know a single person who buys those things without the keyboard and trackpad. And then they make these other weird, obscure things like the Surface Book Studio with the selling point of you can pull the display closer to you and cover the keyboard and only use the trackpad. What advantage does this bring you? Their Surface Hub and their Surface Studio, these are all fitting into very niche categories, and they could be recommended to as artists. If I'm being honest, iPads would probably suit you better than any of these Surface products because Apple offers an objectively better stylus compared to anyone else on the market. I really do not get Microsoft's hardware. It's not very recommendable to people. It's so niche. Combined with software that kind of doesn't really know what it wants to be because, well, you got the start menu and the taskbar. Those all look like you can touch it with a finger. Those are actually one of the few things Microsoft optimized to work with a finger, so you can use a touchscreen. You got the taskbar and basically the window controls like close, minimize, full screen. But anything inside them is so hard to use with a finger. I don't understand why Windows has become so bad and it's not being fixed. I've just had terrible experiences with Microsoft lately. So is the reason why I hate them because they're not Apple? No, it's because from what I'm experiencing, they're just making crap. And then the last company that, well, I have definitely made a few ads posing this, but Intel. I have not been a fan of Intel as of lately. In fact, I have expressed a lot of hate towards them. And in a lot of other videos that are comparing Intel and Apple's chips, I definitely have made these comments that definitely show I am biased against Intel. What is the reason for that? Once again, it's because they've been making garbage. Their CPUs, sure, they can get pretty powerful. That power doesn't do you much good if the CPU is getting so hot it can barely run. Thermals are absolutely out of control, and I know this because, first of all, they've been this way for years. I have a MacBook Pro from 2011, and that thing gets so freaking hot whenever I export anything, I actually worry it will potentially start a house fire. The fact that, well, first of all, Apple does share some faults with letting the chips inside get this hot and not spinning the fans up. But Intel also deserves the blame on this as well, especially with the 2016 generation, or as I personally like to refer to it as, the USB-C generation of MacBooks. Why is that? Well, that was actually around the time when Intel advertised or told other companies, hey, we're getting ready to make our 10 nanometer processors versus the standard 14 nanometers that they've been stuck at for so long. And because they've been telling companies, Apple, one of them, their processors were going to get smaller, which means they're not going to consume as much power, meaning that they're not going to generate as much thermals. Because of this, Apple thought, these things aren't going to get as hot, therefore we can make our MacBooks thinner because, well, if the chips don't get as hot, then, well, we don't need as big and beefy of a cooling system to cool them down. That is actually why Apple thinned the MacBooks, despite that they have run so hot and so poorly. Did Intel deliver those 10nm chips? No, they didn't. And because of that, Apple has already invested so much money into making these new MacBooks, they would have been screwed. So, yeah, they were kind of screwed over by Intel because they were hyping up 10nm so much and they were getting ready to put that into their next generation of chips, but things just didn't work. Intel has had some bad processors for quite a long time. I mean, for a while now, even AMD has actually surpassed Intel when it comes to the better processor, where people have finally voted with their dollar and actually AMD has surpassed Intel. I find it hilarious. Intel really thought that this next generation Alder Lake processor is going to be so great, we're going to win Apple back with this. Apple's going to wish that they had this chip inside their MacBooks. Honestly, no, Apple doesn't. And that's because they still have the same issues as before. They're still going to run hotter, which means you can't have as long sustained max performance, and your battery is definitely going to take a toll, and you're also more likely to, as I refer to it, potentially start a house fire. I am not impressed with Intel. And why have I expressed it more than I have expressed Windows, especially in the comment sections? It's because Intel has made a bunch of advertisements and have basically acted like crybabies because, well, nobody wants to buy their stuff because it's technically not exactly as good as what AMD or Apple is offering. They're making, compared to the competition, the inferior product. That is why I am biased against Intel and I'm so excited for when I eventually get my M1 Pro, MacBook Pro. So, okay, there's why I like certain companies and why I don't. And you know what? These biases I have, either for them or against them, they can change. It just depends on what it is they actually make. I try to be objective. I try to base my opinions on these companies based off of what they've made. When I'm talking about Apple products and I get excited for them, well, it's because they've generally made great stuff that I personally like. And when I'm hating on other companies, it's because they're making stuff that I don't like. I don't like or dislike companies based on logos. While sure, sometimes I can act like a real Apple fanboy in a lot of cases, especially at Best Buy or any other place with an electronics store, you will see me at the Apple section a lot. The reason why I get more excited for Apple or Samsung or OnePlus, because you notice I've made positive videos on them, and I am not excited or not exactly as inclined to make videos about Google or Microsoft or Intel. This is where my bias has led me, and this is what makes me biased. It's really just the products that they make. It's not a war of logos. I'm really hoping that this is what I'm getting across. I don't like companies based on logos or design. I like them based on the products that they make and how it benefits me. I also try to like products even if they're not made for me. Especially with what Apple makes, there are some products that I like but are just not made for me. I like the iPad mini, but because, well, obviously, it's a mini, it's not for me. I like the 24-inch iMac, but it's not for me. And this does extend to other products that other companies have made. I do try to recommend other products for other people because I know Apple is not exactly meant for everyone. I try to think of an Android I can recommend to people. But if you ask me for a laptop to recommend to you, well, you're not gonna get anything from me other than a MacBook because I cannot recommend Windows based on my experience to anyone. There are products out there that I do appreciate existing, especially since if it's just competing against Apple's products. Because you wanna know why? Competition is good. It's what drives companies to make stuff better. Despite that, I am going to pick Apple at the end of the day to get my stuff done. I also like the competition as well because without it, it wouldn't drive Apple to be a better company. I really hope this reflected where my bias puts me in terms of company versus company. Everyone has a bias, even on YouTube. The people who run it, despite that they try to give their unbiased, objective reviews, no, there's still some bias going on in there. There are so many other channels that definitely have biases. If they were truly objective, unbiased, then they wouldn't be using any of these in their pockets. They wouldn't be using an iPhone or an Android. They'd probably be using a flip phone. That's the only way to stay unbiased. But obviously, I choose to have an iPhone in my pocket, an iMac on my desk, and so many other Apple products. So yeah, I'm biased towards Apple, and there are people who are biased towards Microsoft and Samsung, you name it. There is no such thing as an unbiased person, and I don't want to say I'm unbiased. I know I am biased, but there are different ways of being biased towards and against products. So I'm hoping that I can reflect where my bias stands. So far, I think I did a good job because I don't really understand why, but my dad especially, he really thinks I just like Apple products just because of the pretty logo and the pretty design. Alright, thank you for watching. Do me a favor and interact with the stuff below. My name is Alpha DeWolf, Random Alpha, signing out.